Hey Ravi, welcome to the podcast. Nice to see you again.
You too. Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Before we delve into all things automotive with a particular focus on Saudi Arabia today, let's learn a little bit more about yourself and your career first, if that's okay, especially maybe emphasizing some of your previous engagements in the automotive industry.
Absolutely. So yeah, I was very privileged to start my career at Bentley Motors. A very interesting time in their life cycle. So I joined in 2000 when the transfer of ownership between BMW and Volkswagen Group was happening, and the infamous split of Rolls Royce and Bentley. So I worked on the final Rolls Royces to come out of crew, and then was asked to come and join the Conti GT team. Brilliant experience, opportunity to launch a brand new car at the same time as completely rebuilding the factory space. So a great project to be involved with. And then a couple of years in looking at how Bentley develop vehicles for the future. So I went to work with Audi Quattro, Volkswagen Special Vehicles, Bugatti, and Lamborghini to build a new low volume product development process. So that was really interesting. Did that for a couple of years. Signed that off with the Bentley board, and they took that as the planning base for the next generation of cars, which was a massive privilege to be part of that program. Then went off to PA Consulting and spent a couple of years working into Volkswagen Group specifically. So we did some projects with Volkswagen of America, just looking at their low volume manufacturing strategy and their overall manufacturing strategy for some of the non-German regions. So that worked very well. Then I went into a range of different industries, if I'm honest. So I went to PA Consulting. After PA Consulting, I kind of moved back after a couple of moves into IBM. And when I went to IBM, it was very much focused on some of the automotive clients that they had. So JLR was a client, looking at their PLM strategy, so product lifecycle management, understanding how they develop new vehicles, what the technology was that sat behind it. So that was interesting for a few years. I then did a little bit of work in energy and infrastructure, and taking all of the stuff from that I'd learned from automotive into energy and utilities. So the same theory around what tools you need to develop a vehicle are also relevant for developing a capital project. And it was just so happened that Shell were looking at that same technology set, and all the stars aligned. So I had the privilege of working there, and we launched a big program there. I then came out of IBM in 2017, and I had the fortune to go back to Bentley Motors. So there were two key projects that I looked at there. One was Bentley 4.0, so looking specifically at the manufacturing space and how you digitize some of the manufacturing processes. And we looked at all of the kind of value streams across the manufacturing space, and then said, well, okay, how do you map the processes that are there, and B, work out how you put digital solutions in place. So how do you look at problem statements in that manufacturing space, and whether it's logistics, manufacturing, whether it's production, whether it's engineering, whether it's communication with quality, all of those pieces came into the equation. And then having completed that, I was then asked to look at Bentley's customer centricity program. So customer centricity for them was about shifting the emphasis of the company from being very product centric into very customer centric. So looking at how do we make sure that we are aligning ourselves with our sales requirements for the business, driving the customer closeness, developing a customer 360 and a vision of how that customer exists, what information data do we have around them. And we did that in collaboration with Salesforce. So that was a great program for a number of years, where we were able to really make a shift for Bentley Motors in terms of their understanding of their customer. And then there was a seemingly strong relationship, I should say, with the changes that we made and the overall profitability and shift in the organization. So they went from a lower volume of customer order cars to a higher volume, around 70 to 80%. And that's quite interesting for a bespoke manufacturer like Bentley. So having a high volume of retail orders obviously means higher specifications of cars because customers are actually ordering their specific cars, and then a high level of profitability. So they went from around 11,000 units to around 16,000 units across a 2 to 3 year period. So it was a really interesting shift.
No, fascinating. Thank you so much for contextualizing our conversation. As I understand, your past couple of years have been, for the most part, about transformation in the wider sense. And one of the big transformations in the automotive industry at the moment is AI slash Gen AI specifically. I was just wondering, before we delve into Saudi Arabia as a focus, if you wouldn't mind just sharing your perspectives on what Gen AI means for some of these big automotive OEMs, and then what some of the, I guess, lessons learned so far are that you've observed across manufacturers.
Absolutely. So Gen AI for me is an interesting topic, and I was discussing this last week at a conference I was at, and there are I see two real schools of Gen AI. One is kind of generic Gen AI, so common processes to any business. So if you look at accounting, legal, any of the back office functions, they're pretty common across different organizations. So you could get an AI tool to create a set of accounts. You could get an AI tool to create a legal letter based on the implementation. The second is specific AI, so specific Gen AI tools for an industry, and that's where it gets really interested. So really interesting. So there are three real areas where I think there are opportunities for automotive players to move forward, and we're already seeing some of them. So if we look at Tesla, we're seeing AI pushed into the driver assistance systems. So autonomous vehicle driving, autonomous driving, all of those things are starting to use more AI-powered tools, safety features, comfort enhancements, and all of those things are starting to get that tool set pushed around them. Second one for me is looking at vehicle maintenance and predictive analytics. So looking specifically at in-life use of a vehicle and how do you get to the best and optimum way to predict when the vehicle is going to need maintenance based on live driving conditions. So you've got a large data environment that you need to think about in that space. And the third one for me is a really interesting one. So this is AI in automotive design and manufacturing. So how do you take those tools and push them into the design space where you're collaborating between different partners, you're trying to optimize for different things. So I think that there are different considerations we need to think about. And some of this is quite interesting because it comes back from the energy utilities world and even the defense world, where you have to work out what you're designing for. And when I say designing for, there are different emphases you can have. You can design for cost, you can design for maintenance, you can design for reliability, you can design for a combination of those factors. And that's what we've got to think about. So, if we're designing for high levels of maintainability, that allows the in-life cost of a vehicle to go down because we're designing it to be easy and therefore less time consuming to maintain the vehicle. If we are giving AI the parameters to do that, then that's a really interesting steer that we could take.
No, thank you so much. Really, really appreciate that. Pivoting a little bit towards the automotive market in Saudi Arabia, if you would give your high-level perspective on the current market structure and main trends with regards to automotive in Saudi Arabia to someone who knows hardly anything about it, what would you say?
Well, Saudi's a really interesting market. I mean, the last real market that we had developed very quickly was China, and China went towards a very strong bias towards electrical vehicles, and that's really interesting to see. And I think it's a really interesting trend that we're seeing across across the industry, which does have its challenges, not least of which is consumer demand. In Saudi specifically, they've gone down that same route. So having been a traditional oil giant, they're now saying, well, okay, let's look at vehicles specifically that are electric in their nature. They're looking at a single fuel strategy. So there are three real big players that we need to consider. So one is PIF, so the Public Investment Fund in Saudi, which is very much the sovereign wealth fund. It's making the decisions on where the investments go, where the strategy is for all the different industries that they're trying to develop. Secondly, is the national manufacturer, so that's Ceer, and they are purely electric vehicles at the minute. And the third one is Lucid. So Saudi have quite publicly made some big investments in Lucid. Now, for me, that's a really strong electrification strategy. So they're all going towards EVs. The question is, in a country that's as vast as Saudi, that how do you have the infrastructure to support that? So your charging stations, your range considerations, all of these things need to be thought about, and therefore, for their own domestic market, there are some challenges around there. For international markets, we're seeing headwinds against EV adoption. So certainly, if you look at the UK, you look at Germany, you look at some of the stuff that's going on with VW, there are big headwinds in terms of them pushing electric vehicles to market. Having said that, there are some interesting opportunities that come out of that. So VW in themselves may be at some point looking to move on some of the premium brands. They've got Lamborghini, Bentley, that are both brands that seemingly are stuck at the high end in the higher marketplace, who both have strategies towards electrification or hybridization, and therefore there may be options where they're looking to offload those. So for Saudi Arabia, if they wanted to look at their diversification, there are a number of ways for them to do it. So one, looking at acquiring those brands potentially. Secondly, looking at fuel diversification. So looking at what fuels they want to promote. Personally, I'd be looking at hydrogen, natural gas as an alternative, and also looking at biofuels and looking at e-fuels that are coming through. So quite famously, in recent times, Porsche pushed the EU to include e-fuels in its strategy for future vehicles and part of its legislation. That maintains effectively the use of internal combustion engines for some of the German brands, and I think it's a very smart move. I think that we have a strong desire to shift, in 2030, 2035, depending on which country you're in, towards electric vehicles. But my sense is that in order for us to make that transition fully, we're going to take a little bit longer. I can't see it happening in those timeframes because we still have vehicle production today that is petrol and diesel. We don't have the take up. We don't have the infrastructure needed, and the battery technology is not as good as we need it to be. Personal opinion, unless you're getting 450 miles from a charge, and that charge can happen in under 30 minutes, I think you've got a challenge in the marketplace with getting consumers to move across that barrier. And that's not, personally, I think that is a big barrier. And what we've got at the minute, certainly in the UK, is a range of charging speeds that mean it can take from 12 hours down to an hour, maybe even 30 minutes to get an 80% charge in your car. And that doesn't give the consumer any certainty in terms of where they're going to go and what they're going to need. So going back to it, so if I was in the shoes of the Saudi PIF, the investment funds, I'd be looking at how do I create that diversification to reduce my risk.
Just to, first of all, thank you so much for the perspective. To delve a little bit deeper into that, if we look at Ceer and Lucid as the two main brands there, I'm based in the UK, and every now and then you see a Lucid, but it's sort of fairly sporadic. Most people here probably have never heard about Ceer. Do we, asking deliberately a little bit of provocative question, do we really need yet another sort of EV brand that attempts to scale globally, or do you think there, just from a strategic standpoint, there could be value in trying to really understand and build a product for the domestic market?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really interesting perspective, and we kind of have to look at history to work out the future, if that's a way to do it. So, when vehicles first started coming around, they were effectively two two components. You would have a chassis and engine builder, so someone who would build the underneath componentry, and then you'd have a coach builder who would build the top hat that would go on top of the vehicle. We're very much moving back to that space. So when you look at businesses like Lucid, absolutely there's potential for them to do something very different. So we describe them as skateboards in the industry. So you effectively got a powertrain and a chassis setup that can be transferred between vehicles and a different top hat put on top of it. That allows someone who's doing battery development like Lucid to sell their technology to another manufacturer in a way that hasn't really happened before. It maybe not true. So you have seen partnerships in the past where an engine might be shared, or there may be a supply arrangement across the industry, but this is very different in my eyes, because what you're doing is you're giving the heart of the vehicle, you're giving the battery tech, the thing that makes it unique, because the range of engines that we're going to get, and that everything from the 1 liter to the 5-6 liter engines that we have today, we're giving that range away, and we're moving towards a battery tech that doesn't have the same emotive power of getting behind a V8 or a W12 engine, and therefore we have to think about that slightly differently. We have to look at, well, if I'm Lucid and I'm going to share my battery technology and my motor technology, where am I going to derive value from that, and who's going to take that up, and how do I control my IP, and all of those factors come in. But I think that Lucid as a brand needs to work out how it does that. I mean, we've seen a really good example in, is it Rivian, that started to produce their own vehicles, but also vehicles for Amazon. So Amazon trucks that are electric are using the Rivian platform, which is a really interesting way of doing it and going, right, okay, this is what I'm going to do. You see alignments between Hyundai and Kia, where you've got the EV6 and the Ioniq 5 that are two vehicles off the same platform by two different brands that effectively have all the same uh, you know, uh, metrics in terms of their performance. Very different top hats, very different propositions in the market, but very, very common vehicles. And so you can apply that to different aspects. One is battery tech, one is motor tech, the other one is the infotainment side, the electrical architecture of a vehicle. So all those things become things that not only are developed for a brand, but can be developed for a marketplace. And that's where the intelligence comes into designing the future of where those companies go. As for Ceer, I think it's a little bit too early to see what they're doing. I don't think they've got a huge amount of global sales, if any. That's one area that I'm not too au fait with. And certainly Lucid have kind of struggled to build their production volumes. So it's still very much up in the air as to where they're going to go. And I think there is a real question mark as to what the future looks like for those organizations.
Just building on that and linking into one of the earlier topics we discussed around AI, loads of the developments, and you alluded to this as well, are and automotive in general, I guess, is heavily scale dependent in loads of ways, and some of the current I guess, disruptions, both in terms of drivetrain, connectivity, services, and now also Gen AI are very capital intense, and there's still loads of open questions around where should we even attempt to get involved more deeply. Just thinking about players like Lucid and Ceer and linking this back to AI, what would be your advice for them in terms of how to approach the topic of especially Gen AI, which arguably everyone needs to deal with given the sort of value potential in there. But I guess there are lots of different ways to go about it. So what would be your recommendations for brands or organizations like Ceer and Lucid in that regard?
So I think there's a two-stage strategy for them. The first one is as I described, generic AI tools. So back office AI is almost a no-brainer as long as you can contain and manage your data. So there is an absolute logic to applying AI to create efficiencies in the back office and therefore helping your employees to be more productive. I think the leap towards the other areas of AI need to be done with a couple of considerations. So certainly when we come to AI powered driver assistance systems, there's a massive ethical consideration to be put in here. So I think you need to have a real strong capability in understanding how you're going to deploy this technology, what the ethical considerations are, how you create competency inside your business. So, there are competency areas. If you look at, my other bag, which is digital transformation, there is a real shift from how you would deploy a traditional system, so an ERP or a CRM or a supply chain management system, to how you deploy AI. So you really need to think about how do you come up with the tools and capabilities and then deploy them into different instances across the business. This becomes very, very complex for vehicles, because it's not like that's something you can control for the entirety of its life. You're putting it into a product, and therefore you need to think about how that's going to be applied. I think the two areas that are easier to think about are in the design world. So because that sits internally, using AI to help with design and manufacturing, absolute no-brainer. You can start down that road and start to think, right, okay, well, this is a contained environment. How do I maintain, my design? What the things that you need to think about in that space are IP protection, data protection, and ensuring that you have a closed environment. Second thing is around kind of the manufacturing environment. How do you optimize design? So at the minute there'll be scaling manufacturing. So how do you create the most optimum manufacturing environment? What are the tools that you need? All of that can be done using AI tools or generative AI tools to assist in that roadmap. Vehicle maintenance and some predictive analytics. Again, that's the cross between how much of that sits inside an organization and how much of that sits inside the vehicle. So you might have the OEM or the dealer, depending upon whether you've got an agency model or not, having access to data that is predictive. The second you cross that connection between the vehicle and the manufacturer and having a live data stream, there's obviously risks involved in that. So cybersecurity risks, hacking risks, there's data transmission risks, there's data privacy risks. There's lots of things to think about in that space. So that for me would be number two. As I say, number three is the AI in driver assisted vehicles, because you're asking a third party that you have to have trust in to make decisions on your behalf. And that's a really dangerous space. I mean, that's the sort of thing that, if it goes wrong and it goes disastrously wrong, that can sink a brand. That can be really, really a difficult space for a manufacturer to get out of.
You just alluded to some of the risk involved. I completely get all of the use cases you've spoken about. Imagine as a sort of final question to wrap up the conversation. Imagine that you're talking to the Chief Data and AI Officer at one of the either incumbent or new entrants. What would be your top 3 recommendations to unlock the most value from Gen AI, both today, but then also strategically over the medium to long term?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I mean, for me, it's understand the topic first. I mean, it's very new, it's very fresh to a lot of people. So understand the breadth of tools that are available, the pace at which it's maturing. Secondly, understand the nature of AI. So the nature of AI is that unlike a traditional system that you design, build, deploy, test, test, deploy, and use, that stays static once it's used. So you might have some modifications here and there, but it's all in controlled environments and controlled releases. Gen AI, by its nature, is iteratively improving day by day. So you have less control on what's the live version than you do in other systems. So that's got to be a key consideration. The third thing is building a methodology. Build a methodology around how you're going to deploy it. So in my eyes, where you would have an end-to-end program for an ERP, CRM, HCM, whatever the value stream is. In AI, you have to have a central competency that understands the technology set, and then you have to have deployment-specific capabilities. So some real strong business analysis tools and capabilities understand how a specific area of the business works, and you must listen to the business. There are lots of things in having been through transformations where we make assumptions about how things work, and the one thing that is common to miss is that unless you go and live in that person's shoes that's doing the job day to day, you can miss a whole load of information and understanding about how they work, what's important. And it's really important to do that job if you're going to go down this road. You have to be really, really structured. So those are the 3 things I would recommend. I'd also recommend going out and getting external help. It's very easy to get caught up in the magic of running down an AI strategy. There's lots of companies that are going out and buying AI capabilities and buying the chipsets and all this stuff because they want to run these tools. But you need to get help from external parties that can give you perspective, that can give you the tools to think clearly, and to really give you that robust challenge to help you think through problem statements. I mean, that, having spent 20 plus years as a management consultant, it's one of the things that I hope to be able to do for my clients, and be that trusted advisor to say, look, really do think long and hard about this. Don't just think about the closed door environment of your organization. Think about the broader implications. Think about customer implications. Think about stakeholder implications. All those things need to be part of your strategy, and having someone next to you helping you think through those questions is really, really important.
Thanks so much, Ravi. Really appreciate you taking time for this today. It's been a fascinating conversation.
Thank you. Appreciate you taking the time. Really good, Fabian.